British captain disobeyed direct orders, and captured the only intact German U-boat. June 4, 1944, 1,109 hours, 150 miles west of Rio de Oro, French West Africa. Lieutenant Commander Means Johnston pressed the headphones against his ears aboard the destroyer escort Shamrock, straining to decipher the faint metallic ping echoing through the Atlantic depths. The sound he heard would trigger the most audacious capture in American naval history since 1815, an act of calculated disobedience that would earn both the highest military honors and the threat of court-martial from the Chief of Naval Operations himself. The sonar contact was only 800 yards away. Impossibly close. Too close for depth charges to arm properly before reaching their target. Johnston knew what his training demanded. Standard procedure called for aggressive attack, complete destruction, no hesitation. Every submarine engagement of the war had followed this pattern: detect, attack, destroy. But his commander, Captain Daniel Vincent Gallery, had spent the last 3 weeks drilling his men for something unprecedented, something that violated every protocol the Navy had established for submarine warfare. Gallery stood on the bridge of the escort carrier Guadalcanal, the centerpiece of Task Group 22.3. At 42 years old, the former Olympic wrestler from Chicago had already sunk 3 U-boats in the past 4 months. But sinking submarines had begun to feel like a wasted opportunity. On April 9, 1944, his task group had sent U-515 to the bottom after a prolonged battle. Gallery had watched the submarine surface, its crew abandoning ship as it slowly slipped beneath the waves. In those final moments, he had seen something that haunted him, not the enemy drowning, but intelligence drowning. Code books, cipher machines, tactical charts, all vanishing into the Atlantic depths. That night, Gallery had made a decision that would either revolutionize naval warfare or end his career. He would capture the next submarine intact, not destroy it, capture it. The idea was so audacious that when he first proposed it to his destroyer captains, they thought he was joking. No American naval force had boarded and captured an enemy vessel at sea since the War of 1812. The risks were astronomical. Submarines carried scuttling charges designed to obliterate the vessel if capture seemed imminent. Any boarding party would be entering a potentially explosive tomb. But Gallery had done something unprecedented. He had formed specialized boarding parties from volunteers across his task group. 4 weeks, they had trained in secret, studying captured German manuals, learning to identify valves and electrical systems, memorizing the location of scuttling charges. He had equipped them with special tools, pumps, and emergency repair equipment. His men thought their captain had lost his mind. They were about to discover he was playing a game whose stakes exceeded anything they could imagine. The submarine rising toward them through the depths was U-505, commanded by O'Aliaton and Harold Lang, a 40-year-old veteran brought in specifically to restore morale to the most cursed boat in the German Navy. Since her commissioning in August 1941, U-505 had been a floating disaster. Her previous commander, Peter Jack, had shot himself in the head during a depth charge attack, the only submarine commander in any navy to commit suicide during combat conditions. Equipment failures plagued every patrol. The crew believed their boat was hexed. Lang had spent the last 6 months trying to restore confidence in his demoralized crew. He had managed to bring the troubled boat back to fighting condition, but on this patrol, everything had gone wrong again. They were low on battery power, their detection equipment was malfunctioning, and they were completely unaware they had sailed directly into the center of an American hunter-killer group. At 11:10, Shamrock fired her Hedgehog mortars, 24 projectiles arcing through the air before splashing into the ocean in a circular pattern. Unlike depth charges, Hedgehogs only exploded on contact. The silence that followed seemed eternal. Then the distinctive crack of underwater explosions, direct hits. Immediately, Shamrock followed with a pattern of depth charges set for shallow detonation. Inside U-505, the explosions threw men against bulkheads and shattered gauges. The submarine rolled violently, her bow pointing toward the surface at an impossible angle. In the engine room, high-pressure valves ruptured, spraying oil and water. The rudder jammed hard over, locking the boat into an uncontrollable spiral. Machinist Matans Gobila, thrown from his station, watched in horror as the depth gauge spun wildly. They were in an uncontrolled ascent, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Lang ordered the ballast tanks blown, accepting the inevitable. They would have to surface. As U-505 broke through the waves at 11:16, less than 600 yards from Shamrock, Lang made a fateful decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Convinced his submarine was mortally wounded, water flooding the after compartments, he ordered his crew to abandon ship. "Set the scuttling charges," he commanded. "Open the sea valves, destroy the code books." But everything happened too fast. As the crews scrambled up the conning tower ladder, American gunfire erupted from 3 destroyers. Wildcats from Guadalcanal dove from the sky, their .50 caliber machine guns stitching the water around the submarine. Lang, wounded in the leg by shrapnel, was helped over the side by his executive officer. In the chaos and terror of abandonment, with bullets cracking overhead and aircraft roaring past, the demolition procedures were only partially completed. Some charges were set, but not armed. Some valves were opened, but not locked. Code books were thrown over the side, but the most secret materials remained below. This was the moment Gallery had prepared for. From Guadalcanal's bridge, he grabbed the talk between ship's radio and spoke words that hadn't been uttered by an American naval commander in over a century. "Away all boarding parties. I say again, away all boarding parties. Board and take that submarine." On the destroyer escort Pillsbury, Lieutenant Junior Grade Albert Leroy David assembled his 8-man boarding team. David was no ordinary officer. At 42, he had been in the Navy since 1919, rising from enlisted ranks through determination and competence. He knew this mission was likely suicide. German submarine doctrine called for multiple scuttling charges throughout the boat. If even one had been properly set, the submarine would disintegrate the moment they entered. The whaleboat launched from Pillsbury at 11:22, bouncing across the choppy Atlantic toward the circling submarine. U-505 was still making 5 or 6 knots, her jammed rudder forcing her in wide circles, water sloshing over her deck. David's team had to time their approach perfectly, coming alongside a moving submarine with no crew to throw them lines, no one to shut down the engines. As they bumped against the steel hull, David made a decision that would earn him the Medal of Honor. Without hesitation, he leaped onto the slippery deck and sprinted toward the conning tower. Behind him, Radioman's second-class Stanley Widowack and Torpedoman's mate third-class Arthur Nispel followed, while the rest of the boarding party struggled to secure their boat to the circling submarine. David plunged through the conning tower hatch into complete darkness. The emergency lighting had failed. Water sloshed ankle-deep through the control room, and the submarine's inclination made movement treacherous. The smell hit him immediately, a nauseating mixture of diesel oil, battery acid, human sweat, and fear. Temperature inside exceeded 95 degrees Fahrenheit, the air thick with humidity from the flooded compartments. But what David didn't know was that he had an unlikely ally. Ewald Felix, a German sailor who had been slow to abandon ship, had made a decision that would never appear in any official report. In the moments before escaping, Felix had quietly closed several crucial valves, actions that prevented the submarine from sinking immediately. David's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a scene from a nightmare. Water spurted from a dozen ruptures. The hum of electrical motors mixed with the hiss of escaping air. Somewhere in this maze of pipes and machinery, 14 demolition charges waited to explode. David had no way of knowing that only one remained armed, or that it would be discovered days later still live, its timer mechanism having mysteriously failed. Behind David, torpedo man Arthur Nispel squeezed through the hatch, immediately slipping on the oil-slicked deck. The submarine lurched as it continued its circular path, throwing both men against the periscope housing. Through the open hatch, they could hear their boat crew shouting that they were drifting away, unable to maintain position alongside the moving submarine. David had to make a choice, return to safety or continue deeper into what might be a death trap. He chose to go deeper. Moving forward through the control room, David encountered his first major obstacle. The watertight door to the forward compartments was sealed. If the compartments beyond were flooded, opening it would sink the submarine instantly. David pressed his ear against the cold steel, listening. No sound of rushing water. He spun the wheel, muscles straining against the pressure differential. The door opened with a metallic groan, revealing the officers' quarters. The first priority was stopping the flooding. David located the main sea strainer, an 8-inch valve that was allowing thousands of gallons per minute to flood the engine room. With Nispel's help, he managed to close it, the flow of water slowing to a manageable stream. But this was just the beginning. Throughout the submarine, Dozens of smaller valves remained open, each contributing to the slow drowning of U-505. Widowak had found the radio room, and what he discovered there would change the course of the war. The room was a treasure trove of intelligence that German security protocols demanded should have been destroyed within 30 seconds of the abandoned ship order. But in the chaos of the attack, with the submarine rolling violently and water flooding in, the radio operator had fled without completing destruction procedures. The Germans had abandoned ship so quickly that they left everything behind. The Enigma machine sat on the radio operator's table, its rotors still in place, its daily settings unchanged. This was not just any Enigma, but the latest four-rotor naval version, the M4, which the Allies had struggled to decrypt consistently. Around it lay codebooks, some still open to the current date, June 1944 cipher materials, including the special coordinate code that revealed exact locations of U-boat patrol areas, the officer cipher settings, the short weather code book, the short signal book, and most incredibly, big RAM tables not due to come into effect until July and August. Widowak carefully gathered each document, his hands shaking as he realized what he held. A single water-soaked page could contain information worth thousands of Allied lives. He wrapped the materials in waterproof canvas bags that Gallery had insisted each boarding party carry despite skepticism from his officers about their necessity. That foresight would preserve documents that would help win the Battle of the Atlantic. Meanwhile, gunners Mate First Class Chester McCoskey and motor machinists Mate First Class Xenon Lukosius had made their way to the engine room. The scene they encountered was catastrophic. The diesel engines were still running, their thunderous noise making communication impossible. Water sprayed from ruptured cooling lines, creating a scalding mist that burned exposed skin. The deck plates were awash with a toxic mixture of diesel fuel, lubricating oil, and seawater that made every step treacherous. More boarding parties arrived from Guadalcanal and the other destroyers. Commander Earl Troino, Guadalcanal's chief engineer, brought pumps and emergency equipment. Working in the flooded engine room, Troino accomplished something that seemed impossible. He disconnected U-505's diesel engines from her electric motors while leaving the motors connected to the propeller shafts. As Guadalcanal began towing the submarine, the propellers would spin, turning the motors into generators, charging the batteries that would power the submarine's own pumps. It was brilliant engineering under impossible conditions. But Gallery knew the real battle was just beginning. They had to keep this capture absolutely secret. If Germany learned that U-505 had been taken rather than sunk, they would immediately change all their codes. The entire ultra-intelligence operation, the Allied ability to read German communications, would collapse just days before the Normandy invasion. Gallery ordered the most extreme security measures in naval history. The 3,000 men of Task Group 22.3 were sworn to absolute secrecy. Mail was censored. Shore leave cancelled. Any mention of the capture threatened with court-martial. The German prisoners, 58 survivors pulled from the water, were told they were being taken to Casablanca. Instead, they would spend the rest of the war in a special prison camp in Louisiana, held incommunicado in violation of the Geneva Convention. Their families were told they were dead. The tow to Bermuda took 2 weeks and covered 2,500 nautical miles. U-505, painted to look like an American submarine and renamed USS Nemo, arrived at the Naval Operating Base on June 19, 1944. The codebooks were immediately flown to Bletchley Park in England, where they provided invaluable assistance to Allied codebreakers in the final year of the war. But Gallery's moment of triumph turned into a bureaucratic nightmare when word reached Washington. Admiral Ernest Joseph King, Chief of Naval Operations and the most powerful man in the United States Navy, was incandescent with rage. Gallery had risked the entire ultra-secret for what King considered a publicity stunt. The British, who had carefully concealed their captures of U-110 in 1941 and U-559 in 1942, were equally furious. They had deliberately sunk captured submarines to prevent German suspicions. Gallery had not only kept his prize but was towing it across the Atlantic in broad daylight. King seriously considered court-martialing Gallery. The charge would have been endangering Allied intelligence operations through reckless grandstanding. Only the successful maintenance of secrecy saved Gallery from disgrace. The Germans never learned of U-505's capture. Her crew was listed as missing, presumed dead. The submarine was officially recorded as lost with all hands somewhere in the Atlantic. The intelligence value of the capture exceeded even Gallery's wildest hopes. The coordinate code allowed Allied forces to route convoys away from submarine patrol areas with unprecedented precision. The acoustic torpedo recovered from U-505's deck revealed German advances in weapons technology that the Allies quickly developed countermeasures against. The submarine herself became a floating classroom where American engineers studied German technology, learning innovations that would be incorporated into post-war American submarines. Lieutenant Albert David received the Medal of Honor, the only one awarded to an Atlantic Fleet sailor during World War II, but he would never wear it. On September 17, 1945, just over a year after his heroic boarding of U-505, David died of a heart attack at age 43. President Harry Truman presented the medal to his widow the following month. The German crew's ordeal was equally remarkable. Held at Camp Ruston, Louisiana, they were denied Red Cross visits, forbidden male privileges, and kept in complete isolation from other prisoners. The camp, originally built to house members of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, had been hastily converted to hold German prisoners from Rommel's Afrika Korps. But the crew of U-505 was different. They were not just prisoners. They were secrets that had to be kept at all costs. The 58 survivors were placed in a special compound within the camp, surrounded by a second fence topped with additional barbed wire. Guard towers were manned by Navy personnel specifically chosen because they spoke no German. Even the camp commandant was kept ignorant of why these particular prisoners required such extreme measures. The cover story was that they were suspected war criminals awaiting special investigation. Hans Gobeler, the machinist who had experienced the terrifying uncontrolled ascent, later described the psychological torture of their captivity. "We were ghosts," he wrote in his memoir. "Our families had been told we were dead. We could hear other German prisoners in the main camp receiving mail, Red Cross packages, even occasional visits from clergy. We got nothing. We existed in a void, neither dead nor alive." The prisoners were interrogated repeatedly, though they didn't understand why their captors seemed so interested in technical details about their boat rather than military operations. American intelligence officers posing as fellow prisoners were placed among them to gather casual conversation that might reveal important details. Every word spoken was recorded and analyzed. The prisoners' notebooks were confiscated and studied. Even their chess games were monitored for possible coded communications. Oberleutnant Harold Lang spent his captivity in even greater isolation. Held in the base hospital initially for his leg wound, he was kept under 24-hour guard. No medical personnel were allowed to speak to him beyond essential medical communication. For 6 months, he believed he was the sole survivor of his crew. The psychological impact was devastating. In letters written after the war, Lang described contemplating suicide, convinced he had failed in his duty by surviving when his men had perished. The truth was even more complex. American intelligence officers were using Lang's isolation as a tool. By controlling what information he received, they could verify intelligence gathered from other sources. When Lang was finally told that his crew had survived, his relief was so overwhelming that he became unexpectedly cooperative, providing technical details about German submarine operations that he might have withheld under different circumstances. Meanwhile, the other prisoners created their own universe within their compound. They organized classes teaching everything from English to advanced mathematics. They formed an orchestra using instruments made from Red Cross packages and scrap materials. They even published a secret newspaper, handwritten and passed between barracks, maintaining morale through dark humor about their ghost status. One cartoon showed a skeleton in a U-boat uniform with the caption, "Still waiting for mail from home." The Geneva Convention was systematically violated to preserve the secret. International law required that prisoners' names be reported to the International Red Cross within weeks of capture. The Red Cross would then notify families and arrange for mail and package delivery. For the crew of U-505, this never happened. Their names appeared on no lists. Their families received no notification. In Germany, memorial services were held for the lost crew. Wives became widows without knowing their husbands lived. Children grew up believing their fathers had died heroically at sea. The isolation took its toll. 3 prisoners attempted suicide. Several developed what camp psychiatrists called acute depressive episodes. Others retreated into fantasy, creating elaborate mental constructions about post-war lives that seemed increasingly impossible. One young sailor spent hours each day writing letters to his girlfriend that could never be sent, filling notebooks with declarations of love and descriptions of the future they would share. The story took an extraordinary turn 20 years later. In 1964, Gallery, now a rear admiral, invited Lang to Chicago for the 20th anniversary of the capture. The two former enemies met at the Museum of Science and Industry, where U-505 had been installed as a permanent exhibit. The meeting had been carefully orchestrated by Gallery, who had tracked down Lang through German naval veterans organizations. Lang, now working as a harbor pilot in Hamburg, had initially refused the invitation. The memories were too painful, the shame of losing his boat too deep. But Gallery persisted, writing personal letters that emphasized not defeat but survival, not shame but honor in impossible circumstances. When Lang finally agreed to come, he brought with him something remarkable, a detailed account he had written but never published about the final moments aboard U-505. His narrative revealed details that American investigators had never understood. The suicide of his predecessor, Peter Jack, had traumatized the crew so deeply that many had requested transfers. Those requests were denied. The crew believed their boat was cursed, that death was inevitable. Some had stopped writing letters home, convinced they would never return. Lang's account described the moment of the attack with vivid clarity. "We were at lunch," he wrote. "Potato soup. The same meal we had eaten for 3 days because our refrigeration unit had failed. The first explosion threw the soup pot across the compartment, scalding the cook. Men were hurled against equipment with such force that 3 suffered broken ribs. The boat stood on its nose, a 70 degrees angle that sent everything not secured flying forward. I watched our spare torpedoes break loose from their chains, 6,000 pounds of steel and explosives sliding toward the forward bulkhead. The depth charge attack had done more damage than the Americans realized. The main ballast tank vents were jammed open, making it impossible to maintain depth. The stern planes were frozen at maximum dive. The compass was spinning uselessly. Most critically, the pressure hull had cracked near frame 50, a hairline fracture that was allowing water to enter at increasing pressure. Lang knew his boat had perhaps minutes before catastrophic implosion. His decision to surface and abandon ship, Lang revealed, was not panic, but calculation. "I had 58 men under my command," he told Gallery at their reunion. "Boys, really. The youngest was 17. I could die with my ship, fulfill the romantic notion of a captain's duty, or I could save these boys' lives. I chose life. There is no honor in unnecessary death." In a gesture that brought tears to the elderly submarine commander's eyes, Gallery returned Lang's binoculars, which he had kept as a war trophy. But Gallery had something else, something he had never reported to Navy intelligence. He produced Lang's personal diary, which had been found hidden behind a pipe in the captain's cabin. "I read it," Gallery admitted, "every page. It helped me understand that you were not monsters, just men doing your duty as you saw it. The diary should be with your family." Lang opened the water-stained diary, reading his own words from 20 years earlier. "My hands shake as I write this. We have been at sea for 40 days. No contact with base for 2 weeks. The men are breaking down. Yesterday I found Seaman Craw crying in the torpedo room. He had received no mail from home in 6 months. He believes his family thinks him dead. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps we are all dead already, just waiting for the ocean to claim us." They were enemies who had tried to kill each other, Lang told reporters. Now they were friends. The incident that nearly ended Gallery's career had become a symbol of reconciliation. The submarine that should have been destroyed had become a memorial to the complexity of war, where enemies could become friends, where disobedience could become heroism, where capturing rather than killing could change history. The magnitude of Gallery's gamble only became clear after the war when intelligence analysts calculated the value of the captured materials. The coordinate code alone was credited with saving dozens of merchant vessels and thousands of lives in the final year of the war. The detailed knowledge of German submarine operations obtained from U-505 influenced American submarine development for decades. Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the German submarine fleet, never knew one of his boats had been captured. In his memoirs written after the war, he expressed puzzlement about how the Allies seemed to anticipate U-boat movements with uncanny accuracy in the last year of the war. The answer lay in a converted warehouse in Bermuda, where American intelligence officers had spent months extracting every secret from U-505. The 58 German sailors who survived the capture experienced a transformation that mirrored their boat's journey from enemy weapon to museum piece. Many maintained correspondence with their American guards after the war. Several immigrated to the United States in the 1950s. Hans Gobler, the machinist who had closed crucial valves during the submarine's death throes, wrote a book about his experiences that became a bestseller in Germany. He dedicated it to the American sailors who had saved his life. The boarding party members became celebrities within the Navy, though the public wouldn't learn their story until after the war. Arthur Nispel and Stanley Widowack received Navy Crosses. The other 6 boarders received Silver Stars. But they understood the real reward was survival. They had entered a potentially explosive submarine, disarmed its destruction, and emerged not just alive, but victorious. Gallery's post-war career was marked by both triumph and controversy. His decision to capture rather than sink U-505 had placed him at odds with naval orthodoxy, a pattern that would define the remainder of his service. He wrote several books about the capture, each revelation carefully cleared by the Navy's Prom 8 sensors to protect still classified intelligence methods. His first book, Clear the Decks, published in 1951, became a bestseller but infuriated Admiral King, who had never forgiven Gallery for risking Ultra. Gallery's real vindication came from an unexpected source. In 1974, when British intelligence finally declassified portions of the Ultra program, historians discovered that Gallery's capture had actually enhanced rather than endangered Allied code-breaking efforts. The materials from U-505 had provided crucial verification of decrypts that British intelligence had been uncertain about. Several German naval codes that Bletchley Park had only partially broken were fully understood thanks to U-505's complete code library. Alan Turing himself, the genius behind much of Britain's code-breaking success, had written in a still-classified 1944 memo, "The American capture, while initially alarming, has provided invaluable verification of our theoretical work. We now have absolute confirmation of German encoding procedures we had only guessed at. The coordinate cipher, particularly, has yielded patterns we would have needed months more to discern through analysis alone." Gallery became an advocate for naval aviation and a critic of defense cuts, positions that earned him enemies in Washington. His involvement in the Revolt of the Admirals, a political battle over naval aviation's future, cost him promotion to vice admiral. When the Secretary of Defense proposed eliminating aircraft carriers in favor of long-range bombers, Gallery leaked classified information to journalists proving the vulnerability of bomber formations to submarine-launched guided missiles, technology discovered aboard captured German vessels, including U-505. The leak ended Gallery's career advancement but saved naval aviation. President Truman himself acknowledged privately that Gallery's insubordination had prevented a strategic disaster. "You're right, Dan," Truman told him at a White House reception. "But being right and being promoted are 2 different things in this town." But Gallery never expressed regret about capturing U-505. In his autobiography, 8 Bells and All's Well, he revealed the full extent of his preparation for the capture. "I had studied every after-action report from British submarine captures. I knew the British had captured U-110 in 1941, but had kept it secret even from us. I suspected they had taken code materials that gave them advantages they weren't sharing with their American allies. I wanted America to have its own intelligence coup." Gallery had actually begun planning for a submarine capture months before the June 4th encounter. He had requisitioned specialized equipment under false pretenses. Portable pumps were officially for damage control training. Waterproof document bags were for preserving ship's logs during abandoned ship drills. Canvas patches and wooden plugs were standard damage control supplies that happened to match German submarine hull specifications. The last chapter of U-505's story was written in Chicago, where it became the Museum of Science and Industry's most popular exhibit. But the journey from captured enemy vessel to museum centerpiece was itself an epic worthy of recognition. After the war ended, U-505 sat deteriorating at Portsmouth Naval Yard for 9 years, picked clean by souvenir hunters and Navy personnel looking for spare parts. By 1953, virtually nothing remained of her interior equipment. The submarine that had once been Germany's most advanced underwater warfare technology was reduced to a rusting steel shell. The Navy's plan was simple and final: use U-505 for target practice until she sank. Admiral Gallery, learning of this plan, was horrified. He immediately contacted his brother, Father John Ireland Gallery, a Catholic priest who had become a prominent figure in Chicago civic affairs. Father Gallery reached out to Lennox Law, president of the Museum of Science and Industry, with an audacious proposal. Why not save the submarine as a memorial to American naval achievement? Law was intrigued but skeptical. Moving a submarine from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, to Chicago would require passage through the St. Lawrence Seaway, which couldn't accommodate a vessel of U-505's dimensions. The submarine would have to be towed down the Atlantic coast, through the Caribbean, up the Mississippi River to the Great Lakes. The cost was estimated at $250,000 in 1954, money equivalent to over $2 million today. Chicago responded with unprecedented enthusiasm. Schoolchildren donated nickels and dimes. Labor unions offered free work. Corporate sponsors competed to fund specific restoration projects. The city that had sent thousands of sailors to fight in the Atlantic wanted to preserve this tangible piece of the victory they had helped achieve. The towing operation began in May 1954. Coast Guard vessels escorted U-505 on a journey that attracted crowds at every port. In Detroit, over 100,000 people came to see the captured submarine. Veterans brought their children. Former Rosie, the riveters who had built Liberty ships, touched the hull of the enemy vessel their work had helped defeat. German-American communities sent delegations, viewing the submarine with complex emotions, pride in German engineering mixed with relief that such weapons were now museum pieces. But the restoration challenge seemed insurmountable. Gallery's solution was audacious and brilliant. He contacted the original German manufacturers who had built U-505's components. His letter to each company was identical. "We have your submarine. It will be displayed for millions to see. Would you like it to represent German engineering at its best or as the empty shell it is now?" The response exceeded all expectations. Mannheim Diesel sent complete engine rebuilding specifications and spare parts. Zeiss provided new periscope optics. Siemens contributed electrical components. AEG supplied motor control systems. Every company included the same message: "We are sorry you have our submarine, but if she must be there, she should properly represent German technical capability." Most remarkably, every contribution was free of charge. Over 20 million visitors have walked through the submarine that Gallery refused to sink. Schoolchildren learn about the war in its cramped compartments. Veterans bring their grandchildren to show them where history was made. The submarine has hosted thousands of ceremonies, from naturalization services for new Americans to re-enlistment ceremonies for sailors continuing their service. Each event adds another layer to the vessel's transformation from weapon to memorial. In 1989, U-505 was designated a National Historic Landmark. The citation noted not just its role in the war, but its unique position as a bridge between former enemies. The submarine that had been built to destroy American shipping had become an American monument. The crew that had served the Nazi regime had become advocates for democracy. The capture that had nearly resulted in court-martial had become a testament to creative courage. The technical innovations discovered aboard U-505 influenced submarine development worldwide. American engineers spent months documenting every system, creating blueprints that would influence American submarine design for the next 3 decades. The snorkel system, allowing submarines to run diesel engines while submerged, was revolutionary. American submarines had nothing comparable. The German design could extend 40 feet above the hull, incorporating float valves that automatically sealed if waves washed over the intake. This technology alone extended underwater endurance from hours to days. The torpedo data computer found in U-505's conning tower was another revelation. This analog computer could calculate firing solutions for multiple targets simultaneously, accounting for target speed, direction, submarine motion, and even ocean currents. American torpedo fire control systems were primitive by comparison. Within 6 months, American submarines in the Pacific were equipped with improved fire control systems based on German innovations. But perhaps the most significant discovery was the submarine's acoustic dampening technology. The interior of U-505's hull was lined with a synthetic rubber compound called alberich, named after the dwarf in Wagner's Ring Cycle who could become invisible. This coating, embedded with air pockets in a specific pattern, absorbed sonar pulses rather than reflecting them. Tests at the Naval Research Laboratory showed it could reduce sonar detection range by 60%. The hydraulic torpedo loading systems were copied and refined. German engineers had developed a system that could reload all 4 forward tubes in less than 10 minutes, half the time required by American systems. The mechanism used a revolutionary hydraulic ram that could function at any depth without pressure equalization problems that plagued American designs. This single innovation would save countless hours of vulnerability during combat operations. The submarine's battery technology provided equally valuable insights. U-505 carried 2 sets of 62 cells each, providing 2,700 horsepower when running submerged. But it was the battery maintenance and ventilation systems that impressed American engineers. The Germans had developed sophisticated hydrogen detection and ventilation systems that prevented the explosive gas buildup that had destroyed several American submarines. Every American submarine built after 1945 incorporated German battery safety innovations. The acoustic torpedo retrieved from U-505's deck storage represented a capability America didn't know Germany possessed. The T-5 Zonkenig, or Wren, could home in on the sound of ship propellers from over 6 miles away. Initial tests showed it could differentiate between merchant vessels and warships based on propeller cavitation patterns. The Americans had been working on similar technology but were years behind. Within weeks of studying the captured torpedo, American scientists had developed countermeasures that would save dozens of ships in the war's final year. Intelligence officers discovered that U-505 carried equipment they didn't even recognize. A device labeled KUA turned out to be a burst radio transmission system that could compress a lengthy message into a transmission lasting less than half a second, too brief for direction-finding equipment to locate. Another mysterious box proved to be an early form of radar detector that could identify specific Allied radar frequencies and warn when the submarine was being tracked. The codebooks revealed German innovations in communication security that exceeded Allied estimates. The Germans were using a system of grid references that changed daily, with coordinates encrypted using a special cipher that required both the daily key and a set of bigram tables. Even with the Enigma machine, messages were meaningless without these additional layers. The captured materials from U-505 provided a complete set of these tools, allowing Allied intelligence to read German naval communications in real time for the remainder of the war. Gallery died on January 16, 1977, at age 75. His funeral was attended by former enemies and allies alike, including several of U-505's former crew members who traveled from Germany to pay their respects. Harold Lang sent a wreath with a simple message to the captain who spared their lives and showed them honor in defeat. The capture of U-505 stands as one of the most extraordinary episodes of World War II, not because it was a great victory, but because it was a different kind of victory. In a war characterized by total destruction, Gallery had chosen capture. In a conflict that demanded hatred of the enemy, he had shown respect for defeated foes. In a battle where following orders meant certain success, he had risked everything on an unprecedented gamble. The 800 tons of steel that comprise U-505 rest now in climate-controlled comfort, preserved for future generations. Every rivet, valve, and gauge tells a story of transformation, built for destruction, captured through disobedience, preserved through determination. It stands as proof that sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying the enemy but from understanding them, not from following orders, but from recognizing when orders must be challenged. The story of U-505 is ultimately about the moment when one captain decided that intelligence was worth more than destruction, that capture could achieve what killing could not, that disobedience in the service of a greater good could transform a routine patrol into history. Gallery's gamble, David's courage, and 58 German sailors' survival created a legacy that transcends war. They proved that enemies can become friends, that intelligence can triumph over force, and that sometimes the boldest action is not to destroy, but to preserve. The influence of U-505's capture extended far beyond World War II. During the Cold War, American submarine doctrine incorporated lessons learned from the German vessel. The ability to capture enemy technology became a priority that shaped special operations development. Navy SEAL teams trained specifically for submarine boarding operations using detailed knowledge gained from David's after-action reports. Every submarine capture attempted by any Navy since 1944 has studied the U-505 operation. In 1968, when the Soviet submarine K-129 sank in the Pacific carrying nuclear missiles and codebooks, the CIA's operation to recover it, Project Azorian, was directly inspired by Gallery's success. Howard Hughes's Glomar Explorer, the ship built for the recovery, carried equipment specifically designed based on lessons from U-505. Though only partially successful, the operation recovered crucial intelligence about Soviet nuclear capabilities. The human legacy proved equally enduring. Dozens of U-505's crew members maintained lifelong correspondence with their American captors. Hans Gobler, who had closed crucial valves during the submarine's death throes, immigrated to America in 1956. He worked at the Museum of Science and Industry, serving as a guide aboard his former vessel. Visitors were amazed to meet an actual crew member who could describe life aboard the submarine from personal experience. In his tours, Gobler would stand in the engine room where he had nearly died and tell visitors, "This submarine was built to kill Americans. Now it teaches Americans." That transformation, from weapon to teacher, that is the real victory. Not destroying your enemy, but converting them. Not conquering, but understanding. The preservation of U-505 also influenced international maritime law. The 1958 Geneva Convention on the High Seas included provisions specifically addressing captured vessels, largely based on legal questions raised by U-505. The submarine that had violated neutrality, attacked civilian shipping, and served a criminal regime had ironically contributed to strengthening international law. Modern submarine warfare still reflects innovations discovered aboard U-505. The acoustic torpedo technology led directly to the development of the Mark 48 torpedo, still the primary weapon of American submarines. The snorkel system evolved into modern air-independent propulsion. The burst communication system pioneered submarine satellite communication. Every American submarine launched since 1945 carries DNA from the captured German vessel. Intelligence professionals study the U-505 capture as a masterclass in operational security. Gallery's ability to keep 3,000 sailors silent about the war's most dramatic capture remains legendary in intelligence circles. The FBI investigated how Gallery achieved this feat, concluding that his combination of patriotic appeal, strict discipline, and personal leadership created what they called a culture of tactical silence that became a model for classified operations. The Museum of Science and Industry has documented over 40,000 veterans who have visited U-505 with their families, using the submarine to explain their service to generations who never experienced war. Korean War submarine veterans point to improvements inspired by German technology. Vietnam-era sailors explain how acoustic silencing saved their lives. Gulf War veterans describe how lessons from U-505 influenced modern submarine warfare. Each generation finds relevance in the 70-year-old vessel. Educational programs centered on U-505 have reached over 5 million students. The submarine serves as a gateway to teaching not just history but science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Students who enter thinking about war leave thinking about pressure dynamics, electrical systems, and mechanical engineering. Teachers report that no classroom lecture matches the impact of standing inside the submarine where history happened. In 2004, the museum completed a $35 million preservation project that moved U-505 indoors, protecting it from Chicago's harsh weather. The engineering challenge of moving an 800-ton submarine 500 feet underground without disassembly required techniques that advanced heavy lifting technology. Even in preservation, U-505 continued contributing to engineering innovation. The submarine's final transformation came in 2005 when it reopened in a climate-controlled underground exhibition. Visitors now experience a complete story from construction through capture to preservation. Interactive displays allow guests to encode messages using an actual Enigma machine. Periscopes let them scan Chicago's skyline. Sound effects recreate the terrifying experience of depth charge attacks. The submarine that once hunted in darkness now educates in light. Veterans of both navies continue pilgrimages to U-505. In 2019, the last surviving member of Gallery's task group, 96-year-old Raymond Thompson, visited with his great-grandchildren. Standing where Albert David had plunged through the hatch, Thompson said, "We didn't just capture a submarine. We captured knowledge that saved thousands of lives. Every merchant sailor who made it home because we could read German messages. Every convoy that avoided wolf packs because we knew their positions, they all owe something to what happened here." The German perspective remains equally powerful. Children and grandchildren of U-505 crew members regularly visit, seeking connection with fathers and grandfathers they never knew. In 2018, the grandson of Harold Lang donated his grandfather's personal effects to the museum, including letters written but never sent during his secret imprisonment. One letter addressed to his wife read, "If you receive this, know that I survived not through courage, but through the mercy of enemies who proved more honorable than those who sent us to die. Today, U-505 stands as the last accessible Type 9C submarine in existence. Its sister ships lie scattered across ocean floors or were scrapped decades ago. This survivor, preserved through an act of disobedience, has outlasted the nation that built it, the ideology it served, and most of those who sailed in it or captured it. It remains a testament to the moment when one captain's refusal to follow orders changed history. Gallery died believing his capture of U-505 was his greatest achievement. History has proven him right, but not for the reasons he imagined. The intelligence value, while significant, lasted only through war's end. The technical innovations were eventually superseded. But the human story, the transformation of enemies into friends, the preservation of knowledge over destruction, the courage to disobey wrong orders in service of right action, these lessons remain timeless. Every visitor who descends into U-505 enters a space where history pivoted on individual decisions. Where Albert David chose courage over safety. Where Harold Lang chose life over death. Where Daniel Gallery chose capture over kill. Where 58 German sailors and 3,000 American sailors kept a secret that saved lives. Where enemies became teachers and weapons became classrooms. The submarine's motto, painted on its conning tower during construction, read Oda Anang, success or destruction. Neither prediction proved accurate. Instead, U-505 found a third path, transformation. From hunter to hunted, from weapon to memorial, from enemy to educator. In that transformation lies a message more powerful than any torpedo it ever carried, that understanding conquers hatred, that preservation defeats destruction, and that sometimes the greatest victory is refusing to destroy what others would demand you sink.